Good morning, the time is 7 o'clock. You're watching Breakfast News from the BBC.
Welcome to the new series, a new home for the programme, a new Tuesday slot and a new partner in crime.
Hello, I'm delighted to be joining the programme. Let me show you around our new premises. Here we go! Hello, this week I'm in southeast Spain.
Well, as they say in this part of the world, this is awesome. It really is.
Jill Dando,
Hollywood, Los Angeles, the greatest wannabe city in the world. It's not difficult to find a deserted stretch of beach and lose yourself. The government's £3.25 billion package to keep down the poll tax has been welcomed by Conservative backbenchers. Well, we expected a big response tonight, and on the whole, we haven't been disappointed. Fancy a drink? From the Grosvenor House in Park Lane, where the stars, the producers and directors from the world of film and television are arriving for the British Academy's most important evening of the year.
Is it?
Yes.
Put a whip round for you and watch an alarm.
And Jill Dando, lastly, in Portsmouth North. Jill?
Well, David, there does seem to be an aura of Labour confidence here. Now, whether that translates into local seats remains to be seen. We should know in about an hour's time. From the 6 o'clock team, though, good evening.
Good evening.
Sorry. This is so difficult. They always make it look so easy on the planes I fly in. It's probably because they've had a lot more training than I have. There we are, in coordination.
Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, very, very warm welcome. Jill was quite simply the most popular woman on television. And do you know, 20 years on, I'm still quite emotional, and I think it's going to be quite an emotional evening. She was the golden girl, the girl next door, and that was the extraordinary thing about her. Although she was a grade A celebrity, she was this extraordinary, big star. She was somebody who wasn't dazzled at all by it herself. Peter Morpurgo, who's here, who was our long-standing studio director on Crime Watch, called her the kindest person we ever had the pleasure of working with. And even the Prime Minister was bewitched. Jill is totally charming, hugely talented. She was certainly an absolutely fabulous colleague to work with. Now, we all know there's a blaze of publicity about Jill this month. A BBC documentary, lots of press coverage, is something on ITV tonight. It's going to be an ITV documentary tomorrow. Sadly, most of the attention is about the manner of Jill's death. Tonight is about her life. It's to celebrate her life and her remarkable legacy, a major department in a world-class university that bears her name. We'll hear from her family, but first, let's hear from the man she was going to marry, Alan Farthing.
Thank you very much. When Nick first approached me and asked me if I would say a few words, I was quite reluctant. The events of 20 years ago have been gone through in great detail. The trauma of Jill's sudden and still inexplicable death, the overwhelming sorrow, the media coverage, the wall-to-wall coverage, and the still many unanswered questions. But as time goes by, we learn to compartmentalize, to cope, to package the past in a box, and to move on. It never goes away, but somehow it becomes easier to deal with. So the idea of reopening that box and expressing emotions and feelings and having thoughts was not something that I particularly fancied. But to have done that and taken that attitude would have been unfair. At the time of her death, Jill was 37 years old, and she had the same dreams and aspirations that everybody else does. She wanted happiness and fulfillment, and she could see that that could come in the form of a family. I'm lucky. Now I have a lovely wife. I have 2 wonderful sons. I've had the chance of seeing them take their first steps. I've seen them swim their first length of the pool. I've seen the looks on their faces when they get selected for the football team and when they pass their violin exam. All of this was denied to Jill, which really is so unfair, so unnecessary and so pointless. She deserved those experiences, and who am I to cower away from saying a few words? It is perhaps the least I could do. For all that you've seen on the screen, for all that you may have read about, Jill was a normal person. She had normal feelings, normal aspirations, normal thoughts, normal concerns, but she possessed an extraordinary ability professionally that made her befriend everyone who saw her. If you want to know the real sadness about Jill's loss, then just think back through your own lives over the last 20 years and think of all those happy occasions you've had, because the sorts of things that make every one of you happy are exactly the sorts of things that would have made Jill happy. What do I say 20 years on? I think probably the same as I said on the 26th of April 20 years ago. Jill was admired by those, many of those, who'd never met her. She was respected by those who worked with her, and she was loved by everyone who knew her.
Alan was actually introduced to Jill by one of Jill's best friends. She's a gynecologist. Like Alan, she's now impossibly distinguished. I think she was the first woman to serve as principal of St George's University of London, the first female chair of the Medical Schools Council. She's a professor at Imperial College London. But most of all, and most relevant, she was Jill's confidant and a very, very close friend, Jenny Hyam.
Thank you very much. It certainly is a very moving day today. I met Jill before she was that famous. It just goes to show how far she came. She was still in the West Country, and I was invited by a mutual friend to enjoy a ski trip. Not the sort of posh ski trip that Jill ended up doing. This was one whereby the coach travelled for over 30 hours to get to the ski resort, and the accommodation was of the most basic quality. I was billeted to share a room with 2 Jills and a Jenny. So the 3 of us talked long into the night. And frankly, that was the bedrock of our friendship. Jill was an excellent conversationalist. She was a very good listener. She was highly intelligent, although frankly she doubted that in herself quite inappropriately, simply because she hadn't gone to university. She was also great fun. The years flowed, her meteoric rise to fame occurred, but various other things persisted. She was very organised and very reliable, and that meant she was there for me. Going out, going on holiday, reading at my wedding, becoming a godparent to one of my children. She didn't let me down. She would come around after the news, borrow some clothes and down dress to prevent the dry cleaning bills that are incurred with playing with toddlers. And finally, there'd always be lots of peals of laughter. And during my process of grief, one of the things that I worried is I'd forget what that sounded like, but I'm pleased to say I'm able to recall it without any difficulty. Friends help each other. I think that I did help Jill in the brilliantly successful introduction that led to an engagement. And on the morning of the 26th, which was sort of the schism in many people's lives in this room, there was much, as always, to discuss about the future. What happened was utterly incomprehensible. There was the initial paralysis of grief and the gradual horrible seeping recognition of the permanence of the loss. A group of us came together to try and achieve something positive in remembrance of a simply marvellous woman. Even with Jill's star quality and massive support, it was hard work. But eventually it culminated in the successful launch of the JDI. For me at that time, who was going to be appointed a leader was important to set the tone of something that was going to be in Jill's name. I thought, Gloria, you were a perfect choice. No nonsense, of course highly able, but delivered with humanity. I think Jill would have approved, and that was important to me.
I'm delighted that several members of Jill's family are with us today. Sadly, her dad, Jack, died some time ago. Her brother, Nigel, is here somewhere. Where are you, Nigel? Hi, hello to you. And her cousin, Judith, who was especially close to her, Judith Dando.
I was going to do this without notes, but I was a little bit concerned that the emotions of the evening might get to me, so I'm afraid I have written my words down. As you will know, Jill was born with a congenital heart problem and needed life-saving surgery at the Bristol Children's Hospital as a toddler. Jill was forever grateful for the magnificent life this bequeathed upon her, and it explains why she was such a supporter of the British Heart Foundation. This is also why I've committed to run the London Marathon on Sunday to raise funds for the British Heart Foundation in Jill's memory. Despite this shaky start and the huge sadness of her mother's early death, Jill never felt sorry for herself, except maybe during the period she had dawn starts when she was working on breakfast time. Jill lived life to the full, seizing every opportunity and taking her friends and family along with her on the adventure. As Alan said, she was a normal West Country girl who considered herself very lucky, and she did her utmost to ensure that everyone, including those she met along the way, shared in her good fortune. She was kind, generous, sincere, and fun-loving. This is a card one of my friends who met Jill during that time when Jill and I lived together sent to me recently, and I just wanted to read something that she wrote. I was invited to a party you had at the house you shared with Jill, and my overriding memory of that day, apart from sharing the sofa with Jeremy Paxman, was of a very happy and slightly tipsy Jill lying in the garden and laughing up at everyone as she kicked off her shoes and threw them over the next-door neighbour's garden fence. The following morning, she was back on the box, very much business as usual. I think that really sums Jill up. I will forever feel her loss, as I'm sure all those here tonight who were touched by Jill will do as well. Like me, I am sure you fight the same constant battle between your happy memories of her and feelings of profound loss. This is testament to the impact that she made on all our lives. We have an obligation to Jill to make the most of our lives, to consider, like she did, that our presence on this planet is an absolute gift, and that we should look for opportunities to experience hope, buoyancy, and happiness, even in the dullest moments. And to return to my friend's note, which touched me greatly, I would like to repeat her misquote from Bob Dylan's Forever Young, which fits Jill perfectly. May she build a ladder to the stars and climb on every rung. May she stay forever young.
You can sponsor Judith as she raises money for the BHF. There is a British Heart Foundation. This was Jill's favourite charity. It's British Heart Foundation stand outside. There are books out there. You don't have to pay for them, but please do. It's called Crime, so maybe you ought to pay for them if you decide to take one. Please do. And there's a sort of collection out there. So if you want to give to Jill's charity, please do. Now, for those here who are too young to have remembered Jill, and you had to be too young because she was on just about everything that was on television. You've seen she was on Crime Watch, she was on the Holiday Programme, all these top-rated shows. But she also presented the evening news, and you'd have seen a bit of that earlier on. That was, to be honest, a testosterone-fueled environment at times, and frankly, sometimes a little bit sexist, and not always easy for somebody like Jill. But there were some great colleagues there too, and I know she enjoyed quite a lot of her time there, but above all, she was an extraordinary hit with audiences. Her boss then now runs the whole of the BBC, and he was going to be here tonight, but in fact he's had to go abroad this evening. So before he left, he recorded his own tribute, the Director General of the BBC, Tony Hall.
Jill's death was one of the most shocking events that's ever happened to us here at the BBC. She was such a big part of our family. And even 20 years on, you'll find people in this newsroom who have such vivid stories to tell about Jill, or who've modelled themselves on her. And that tells you something about how popular Jill was. She was so likeable, totally charming, professional, appreciative of all the work that went on behind the scenes. She made producers feel that she had the easier job and that she was lucky to be working with them. She wore her fame lightly and always made other people feel their stories were more interesting than her own. And given her celebrity, that speaks volumes about the kind of person that Jill was. On screen, she had something really special, something you can't teach people. She would walk into a studio and make it her own effortlessly. She was one of those very rare presenters at the time who liked to be on open talk back to the gallery, so she could hear everything that was going on backstage and at the same time focus on her own performance. And that's perhaps why she'd handle any breaking story with great authority and grace. And of course, audiences everywhere adored her. She somehow looked through the lens and connected to the individual, and that's an amazing talent. It felt like she was talking personally to you, telling you about what had gone on in the world that day, or where you might like to go on holiday, or hoping you might solve some terrible crime. She was one of the most gifted presenters we've ever been lucky enough to have. Get to know her, and you saw this extraordinary kindness warmth and modesty. And I feel privileged to have worked with Jill. But I'm also really aware that viewers felt they knew her too, and that she was part of their family. And that's why her death was so incredibly shocking to everyone. It felt very personal to so many people. And it was, of course, heartbreaking to many of us who'd worked with her at the BBC. 20 years on, I'm so glad we're coming together to celebrate Jill's life and to shine a light on the values she stood for. Those values feel every bit as important and relevant today as they did when she and I were part of this newsroom. And I'm honoured to be part of tonight's event.
Well, I felt quite honoured to be working with her on Crime Watch, but that show only went out once a month. She spent a great deal more time with one other production team in particular, the Holiday Programme. She filmed with them around the world, and she said it was the most fun she ever had in her career. And in one memorable trip filming in Vienna, she found herself face to face with the A-list pop star that she'd had a teenage crush on, Cliff Richard.
This truly is a Cinderella fairy story. I came here unescorted, but I'm told that a prince is waiting in the wings. His name is Marcus Salvator von Habsburg-Lothringen. It's not!
Listen, Jill, I'm so sorry about this. I mean, poor Prince Marcus, he had no chance. I nobbled him. I let his tyres down so I could get here.
I have my knight in shining armour.
You're too kind. Well, I mean, I'd have gone to Cleethorpes Town Hall to dance with you, Jill. Listen,
I can't believe it. I didn't know anything about you being here.
Listen, I know you didn't. I know you thought it was Prince Marcus. What's his name, didn't you? Well, it's not. I'm afraid it's got to be me. Listen, do you mind if we wait for a waltz? I'm not sure I could do this.
I can't do this. I don't know what it is.
Do you mind if I whirl her away?
Oh, you've met well. I can't believe this.
Hi there. I really wish I could be with you all celebrating and paying tribute to Jill Dando. I can honestly say that she was really one of my closest friends, and I still very often think of her. In my deepest, darkest, horrific days, I was surrounded by friends, but there was always one missing. Jill Dando was beautiful, funny, intelligent, but above all, a genuinely nice, kind, and thoughtful human being. And I can honestly say on behalf of all of us, I guess, that we will miss her and always love her. Here's to a very special person, Jill Dando.
Cliff became a trustee of the Jill Dando Fund. He couldn't be here tonight because he's in Barbados, lucky him. But I'm delighted that the most important person can be here from the Holiday Programme, its producer. She went on to become a leading figure in British television, the former chair of BAFTA. She's here tonight, though, as Jill's mentor, her confidant, her friend, Jane Lush.
Good evening. So, it wasn't a good start. I first met Jill when my then boss, Mark Thompson, who went on to become the BBC's Director General, said to me that Jill had been in touch with him to suggest herself as the next presenter of Holiday. He instructed me to meet up with her, and I was more than a bit put out. Who was this pushy person who'd circumvented me and gone straight to my boss? She started by apologising for pulling strings, and then explained it had been a childhood ambition of hers to present the Holiday Programme. I was smitten, we bonded, and with one season of taking over a rather tired old staple in BBC One's schedule, she turned Holiday into a hit show and transformed herself from a BBC News presenter to a fully fledged star with a huge and loyal audience. The team, some of whom are here tonight, all adored working with her. Not that she wasn't exacting, because as the true professional she was, she demanded that everything was as good as it possibly could be. But she was hard-working, conscientious, and brought her storytelling journalistic skills to the job. and at the end of the shooting day, she was more than happy to let her hair down and relax with her crew. What's not to love? On one assignment, she was in the Caribbean attending the beach wedding of a British couple, and she effectively had the task of performing the marriage ceremony. She took it incredibly seriously and wanted to do her best by them at this most important moment in their lives. Fully involved in the wedding, she became very emotional and tearful, but I have no doubt that it was also because she was thinking about her own upcoming engagement, which was still a secret. She'd fallen hook, line and sinker for Alan, and it was clear her days on holiday were numbered. Understandably, she no longer had the appetite to travel the world. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what made Jill a standout broadcaster, equally at home reading the news as we've seen, as she was jetting around the world to the most and least glamorous holiday destinations. Yes, she was a superb professional, but more than that, it was clear to the viewers that what they were seeing was authentic. Jill, on and off the screen, was the same, and viewers understood this because they are incredibly savvy. On the holiday programme, we could send her to a British seaside B&B or a 5-star hotel in Mauritius, and she would be as natural in either place. Watching so much footage of Jill recently, and indeed this evening, what's also struck me that even with the passage of 20 years and more, she isn't the slightest bit dated. Her natural style and affinity with the camera is timeless. There is so much that is tragic about her early death, particularly the unfairness of the happiness that had been snatched away, but she also had so much more to give in her television career. I've often imagined her presenting Strictly Come Dancing, which she would have loved, and she'd have been excellent, as engaged with it as the fiercely competitive contestants are. But let's not ponder on the what might have beens. Let's remember Jill for all her skills and attributes. She taught me so much, but perhaps this one might surprise you. She showed me that it's okay to be ambitious. No more than that. It's okay for a woman to be ambitious. And I believe her legacy, which we're celebrating tonight, is that she inspired many others to exceed their hopes and ambitions, just as she did. I'd like to finish by telling one personal story about Jill, which speaks for itself. When I left the holiday programme, I had a wonderful farewell party. The team was singing a version of Cliff Richard's Summer Holiday to me with their own words, when, to the amazement of everyone, Cliff bounded into the room, grabbed the mic, and sang it his way. Of course, it had been Jill who'd arranged for him to surprise me in a wonderful reversal of what we'd done for her at the Vienna Opera Ball. That night, she gave me a parting gift of a very eccentric-looking teapot with holiday memorabilia adorning it. Still sits in my kitchen. But the next day, she came to my office and she said, "I have another present for you," but I didn't want to show off in front of everyone. So very Jill. It was a beautiful and expensive alarm clock from Cartier, which sits on my bedside table, so that every morning I can remember the kind, generous and wonderful person that she was. I'm so lucky and proud to have had Jill Dando as a colleague and friend.
If it all sounds a bit saccharine, it is the truth. It's really hard to think of a negative thing to say about Jill. And certainly, professionally, it was an incredibly hard thing to find anybody who could step into her shoes. And on Crime Watch, we agonised over it for a time. But actually, it was perfectly clear who the obvious candidate was. And there was only one candidate. And it turns out that Jill was a hugely important influence on her. Ladies and gentlemen, Fiona Bruce.
Goodness me. I feel a bit of a fraud in some ways standing here because so many of you knew Jill so well, and I knew her only slightly, I'm sad to say. And of course, as is obvious from what we've heard tonight, she was so much more than her career. But I've always felt I owe a large part of my career to her. And because of that, I'm very grateful to just briefly have the chance to pay tribute to her this evening. I first met Jill in the tea bar at Television Centre, and I was a rookie reporter, and she was the star of the news and the holiday programme, and I was rather overawed by her, and I did think how pretty she was. I know that's very shallow, but I mean, she was gorgeous. And that was one of the first things I thought, and I left thoroughly starstruck by this little chance encounter. And I took over the 6 o'clock news from Jill when she decided to move on to other programmes. I have to say, I felt then, and I feel now, the BBC was mad to let her go from the news, incidentally. And of course, as Nick says, I took over from Jill on Crime Watch in the saddest of circumstances. What I want to say this evening was that Jill led the way for me, and not just in the programmes I did, but also in how I could do them. She showed that you can do the news and you can still show your humanity, your warmth, your sense of fun, your unashamed love of Cliff Richard. Be a bit ridiculous if you want to. She was, as so many people have already said, she was a fully rounded person on air, as she clearly was in life, and the audiences loved her for that. And I think more often than I suspect you might realise, would I be presenting the programmes I love, combining just recently Question Time and the news with something like the Antiques Roadshow and other programmes I've made over the years, if it wasn't for Jill? I don't know for sure, but I know that she helped make it possible for me. She broke the mould. And I would love to talk to her about it, get some advice, and to thank her. But of course, I was never able to do that. So in a small way, I'm doing that now. So Jill, I owe you. Thank you.
Super. Well, we've not only got broadcasting royalty tonight, we've other royalty too, including most of the members of the charity that was set up in Jill's name. And the Jill Dando Fund used to meet in each other's houses. We'd meet at my house, we'd meet at Alan's house. I can't remember them all. But I do remember one house in particular we met at, because it was just up the road from here, just at the bottom of the Mall. And that's because one of our trustees lived there, and I'm delighted that she's here with us tonight, Her Royal Highness Sophie, Countess of Wessex. Sophie has made a point of being with us tonight, even though she shouldn't be here. I know she has another engagement, and it's a long way away. She has to get across to East London. She has to be there at 7:30, and she is not going to make it. But at least she has been with us. Sophie, I'm really grateful. I think everybody's grateful. But I think, Alan, if you wouldn't mind, I think the Countess needs to be escorted away from here so she makes her appointment. Thank you very much indeed, Sophie. Thank you. Let me, for those of you who weren't on the Jill Dando Fund, there's quite a few here, and those of you who don't know a lot about it, let me just take you back and tell you a little bit about it. When Jill was on Crime Watch, her role was to help solve crimes. And for those of you too young or didn't know the show for other reasons, perhaps you weren't from this country, and quite a few of the academics weren't, it was a sort of whodunit, a televised whodunit where the audience were armchair detectives. But it pretty soon became clear that crime had an ebb and flow of its own accord. We were never going to arrest our way out of trouble. We needed to do much more to prevent it. We needed to, if you like, copy public health, where life expectancy has doubled in the last 200 years since we started applying a proper evidence base to it, since we started challenging ingrained beliefs and assumptions. And it's the same with engineering. If you look around now and see virtually everything around us, electric light, everything, which would have seemed like a miracle to people 200 years ago. In fact, many of the things that happen now would have seemed a miracle even 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. Could we do something as dramatic as that in crime prevention by using the same scientific methodologies? Could we turn the idea of how to solve crime on its head? After all, saying crime is caused by criminals is a bit like saying that driving is caused by motorists. it doesn't really help. It's a tautology. So how could we use scientific evidence base to help people behave more socially responsible? Whether, just as we try to get drivers to use public transport, could we make people default? Could we make things default to safe? Well, that was the thought behind crime science, and I've been discussing the concept with someone from the Home Office, Gloria, who you've heard about and will hear from later, but also with an inspirational professor, Ken Pease, who sadly isn't here this evening. And I'd also asked someone else who was going to be here, but sadly told me this morning he couldn't make it either, and that was John Stevens, now Lord Stevens, who was then Metropolitan Police Commissioner. We were talking in his office, how could we make people see that prevention wasn't sticking plaster? It was much more like a vaccination or hygiene. And I said, and been talking to him for several months about how I wanted to create some sort of institute, and then went to see him quite separately about wanting to create something in Jill's name. And it was John who said, you're daft. You've got these two ambitions. They obviously go together so well. What better tribute could there be to Jill Dando than University Department in her name, the Jill Dando Institute of Crime Science? And that was the start of a national appeal. And as I say, most of the fund's members are here today. Jane Lush, of course, we've heard from. Sita Kumar, where is Sita? The editor of Crime Watch, was very close to Jill herself. Abel Haddon, who I can see down there as well. Jenny Hyam. Gloria Hunniford. Alison Lewis. Ali, where are you? I know Alice, hello, sitting back there. Robin Williams. Robin, haven't seen you. I know you. Yes, hi. Hello, Robin. We had cross-party political support as well. Jack Straw helped us as Home Secretary. And we had Michael Dobbs as a trustee. Michael had been an aide to Margaret Thatcher and Tory party chiefs of staff, and he was known as a masterful, if not frankly, Machiavellian political operator. And as many of you will know, he put that to good use as the author of House of Cards. He also put it to good use in helping us put his name to the Jill Dando Fund, and that's probably why he is now Baron Lord Michael Dobbs. Michael, over to you.
I shan't even try to live up to that gracious introduction. Thank you, Nick. And I also will not take personal offence at the disappearance of Sophie Wessex. It's been known that a member of the House of Lords can empty a crowded room in under 30 seconds. So before the rush begins, just a few words about Jill and the fund. Jill and I first met through our mutual interest in travel. She was always mischievous, and she would take one of my books on her trips for the holiday programme and leave them lurking illicitly on the camera and hoping that the crew wouldn't notice. It was our little private game. And I would do serious damage to my neck as I searched the screen for sight of my novel. Was it hiding behind the coconut, or was it lying somewhere on the sand? And we became dear and devoted friends. And then she was gone. When a brilliant light suddenly goes out, we're left struggling in the darkness. And it takes someone with exceptionally keen eyesight and foresight to peer through the gloom. And that someone was, of course, Nick Ross. Nick, you gathered a group of friends around your dining table, royalty, relatives, a few political rascals like me, and also some really nice people too. And the Jill Dando Fund was born. As you've heard, the committee met at each other's houses, and even at that rather more salubrious dining room than you have at the end of the Mall. And a staggering number of individuals and businesses supported it. Too many to name this evening, but you know who you are, and you know what good you did. Out of darkness came the light. Remember the forget-me-not buttons that were left in buckets at supermarket counters? If my memory serves me correct, we weren't allowed to charge for them, but we could accept a gift. And they gave, ordinary members of the public, people whose lives had been touched by Jill, who invited her into their homes every week, who understood how very special she was, and who refused to allow her to be forgotten. She was light, she was life, she was laughter, she was love. We grow old, yet through what was the fund and is now the Institute, Jill stays as young, as beautiful, as mischievous, and as inspiring as ever.
Thank you. Well, the fund raised quite a bit of money, and the odd thing is, when you've got a lot of money, you're suddenly very popular. And a lot of universities were very keen on hosting the Jill Dando Institute. And incidentally, as Michael said, we ought to thank so many companies. It's a long time ago, but one or two will be mentioned later, I think. But I want to thank Lloyd's Bank. Reliance, incidentally, the security company, is still very much involved with the Jill Dando Institute. Then, having got the money, as I say, who do we give it to? One of the issues was any university had space, frankly, but much more important, did they understand it? And I went to one university to sound them out, and they offered us a fantastic suite of offices. I mean, it was absolutely glorious, overlooking the Thames. It was wonderful. And then I went to UCL, University College London. And they had absolutely no office space at all, not even a cupboard, and they were very open about it. But what they did do was quite remarkable. I walked into a room and there was a horseshoe of people all around the room, and I can't remember, I think Alan, you were with me, and I think some of the other members of the fund. And there the provost had gathered virtually every member of every faculty, every department in the university. Every one of them had mugged up on crime science. Every one of them was saying, this is what we think we can contribute. It was a sort of an A to Z. It was, I mean, definitely architecture was certainly there, and town planning. We went through economics and psychology and statistics, the physical sciences, including, I think, zoology. I mean, we had the lot. It was truly intellectually impressive. And the point of crime science was we will frankly be promiscuous about where we find ideas and skills. And this is a university that is truly a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary organization. And the fact that the Jill Dando Institute has become world-class is substantially down to its two directors, certainly, but it's also substantially down to its home, University College London. And let me introduce the current provost, ladies and gentlemen, Michael Arthur.
It's a very great honour to be here with you this evening to pay tribute to an amazing woman. I didn't have the privilege of meeting Jill in person, and the Jill Dando Institute was established before I joined UCL. But I, along with everyone at UCL, am deeply proud of what we are achieving in her name. UCL has a long history as a pioneering institution. We were the first university in England to accept students of all religions and the first to admit women on the same basis as men. As Nick said, we have always been instinctively interdisciplinary, knowing that to solve major challenges, you have to bring together a range of different knowledge, expertise, methods, and technologies. And we've always been global, collaborating with universities, businesses, charities, and government bodies around the world to advance research and translate it, importantly, into practical impact. So UCL was the natural home for the world's first institute devoted to crime science, which itself is defined by being multidisciplinary and global. The Institute was established with just one member of staff, Professor Gloria Laycock, who will be speaking in a moment. It now works across a range of disciplines, from architecture, town planning, and geography to economics, engineering, medicine, and psychology. It has grown to encompass a range of interdisciplinary centres and academic activities, ranging from forensic sciences and future crime to global city policing. And it's developed a range of specialist undergraduate and postgraduate courses. My predecessor as UCL Provost and President was Professor Malcolm Grant, who's here in the room this evening. He described the Jill Dando Institute as a jewel in UCL's crown, and I wholeheartedly agree with him. Crime science is a vital focus for scientific and academic inquiry because it delivers real, long-term benefit to individuals and to communities. I don't have to tell anyone here that crime destroys lives. So investment in crime science is investment in reducing harm in a very real way. I hope all of you who knew and loved Jill are comforted to see her name and legacy kept alive in such an impactful, growing and evolving way. It's a legacy for the long term and a heritage that UCL takes very seriously. I am delighted to be joined by two senior figures in the field who will be speaking shortly. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm delighted you mentioned Malcolm Grant, who was hugely influential, and maybe Gloria will find time later to explain one of the things he did, which was inspired. What do you do with a new department? Criminology is usually based, it's a sort of arts, what is it? It's philosophy, it's politics, it's usually based in the humanities or sometimes in laws. And the idea was to put it with engineering, absolutely practical, and it's been inspired. And I know the Dean of the Engineering Faculty is here this evening. One of the things I would say, Provost, is the name JDI is not just important in this room, not just important because of Jill. It has actually become a brand which is now known by a lot of people around the world. And to me, it's really important that the university looks after its brands. You have world-class, the Bartlett School of Architecture, you've got the Slade School of Fine Art, you've got the Jill Dando Institute, and long may that name be the Jill Dando Institute and not become something bureaucratic like the Department of. It is the JDI. And having said that, how do you create a new discipline from scratch? It's not exactly easy to go and recruit crime scientists from around the world because there are no crime scientists. And as you've heard, it was started entirely by one person. Well, actually not entirely one. She did have a little bit of support in the secretary, I think. In casting around for the first director, it was so damn obvious who the person should be. And it was brilliant that she applied. It was an overwhelming, unanimous choice, even before she'd opened her mouth at the interview board, and she turned out to be absolutely brilliant doing it. And I remember one of the best moments of my life, actually, was being able to ring this person who had been working as a civil service in the Home Office and say, "Good morning, Professor Gloria Laycock."
Good evening. I'm an extrovert. So when the then provost, phoned me up and after my interview said, "We'd like to offer you the position as the first director of the Jill Dando Institute," I said, "Oh, fantastic, thank you so much, that's absolutely wonderful." And then I hung up and thought, oh. I realised not only that it was a huge honour, but it was actually a huge responsibility to the people who'd loved Jill Dando so much and who'd done so much to raise the money to create the institute itself. I took the task very seriously. And I can tell you now, it's impossible to set up a world-class institute without an enormous amount of help. And the support I got was driven by two factors. One was rational and was related to crime science. And one was emotional, and that came from Jill herself. When, as the director of a brand new institute in her name, I approached anyone for help, the doors were opened. First of all, the Home Office agreed to pay my salary at UCL for 3 years. Thank you, Jack Straw. I didn't have to pay myself out of this Jill Dando fund money that I was so jealous of guarding. I actually treated it as though it was my money, in the sense that I wouldn't spend a bean unless I had to. So paying myself was not something I wanted to do. And that all wasn't because of crime science, it was because of Jill. Next was HSBC. In early 2002, and you won't be surprised to hear, we'd actually overgrown the, I was going to say miserable little space that UCL had given us, but that's totally ungracious. I'm so sorry, Provost. I went to HSBC to thank the bank for their support of the Jill Dando Fund. And I was astonished, actually, to be met by the head of HSBC Holdings, Sir John Bond, and the head of the UK Bank. I actually was astonished they had the time to see me. I mean, these people are supposed to be really busy. Anyway, one of the first things Sir John said was, "We've got no money." And I thought, my God, I bank with HSBC. Anyway, I had to take that on the chin. But we had an interesting chat. It was actually about crime science. And as I was heading for the door, I said, "Have you got any space?" We'd already outgrown our UCL offices. And Sir John said, "Find us some." And I thought, I'd love his job. I mean, what power, find us some. And the next day I got a phone call from the bank and they said, "We've got 2 places for you to look at." One was opposite the Royal Court of Justice. In the foyer, I was thinking I could have a conference for 150 people here. It would be wonderful. I could sublet that bit over there. They said we'd have to go back to Sir John if we let you have that, because we could let it for £250,000 a year. So I thought, better not, push my luck. We ended up in a branch of HSBC. We were over the branch in Old Street, number 1 Old Street. They paid all our bills, they provided the furniture, and they wouldn't let us have it for less than 3 years because they told me that's how long I'd need to set up the institute properly. So we moved in, and using the Jill Dando Fund money, I then hired a small group of BYTs. BYTs? Bright Young Things. Mainly from Australia and New Zealand, and they were all doing their world tours, so they weren't looking for permanent positions. But they were very clever, and they pulled in research funds and got our name out there, whilst we designed the world's first MSc in crime science. And this is where the rational arguments came in. We were teaching an entirely new discipline that no one had ever heard of, thank you, Nick. And I had to persuade established academics that crime science actually made sense. One of our first recruits developed short course programs for police and crime analysts, and he then recruited a really super associate, and both are still with us. They taught well over 1,000 analysts working in the police in those early years. We stole our first 2 established academics from Liverpool University, where they were both senior lecturers. They came to UCL on fixed-term contracts and the promise from me of a proper job if we could just grow enough. They're still with us now as established professors. By the end of 2004, we had a staff of 35, including one of the world's most influential experts on evaluation. Ron Clark, an outstanding scholar from the US, believed in crime science so profoundly that he came for 3 months to teach pro bono, and he did that twice. And then, as Nick mentioned, came a really smart move from UCL. We went from being part of the School of Public Policy to join the Faculty of Engineering Sciences, and that was just so fantastic. It was smart because it reinforced the notion that we were about engineering a safer society, and that, like all good engineers, we solve problems. We solve the crime problems that face society. It was a super thing to do. And the other thing, I mean, just to digress slightly, I would go to the meetings chaired by the deans, and nobody ever thought you would do anything but use science and engineering to solve problems. In the social sciences, they don't necessarily think science has got anything to contribute to social problems. It's really weird. I mean, I don't agree with them, but they can, question the idea of the application of science in that way, which we never had to do with the engineering. They just thought, well, what else would you do? And I think they were right. We also got some big grants. We got £7.2 million from the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council for 50 PhD studentships. 50 PhD studentships, all fully paid, and that was transformational for the Institute. That same year, we hit the academic jackpot. The big prize for a world-class university is to be recognised for world-class research. And in our first assessment, and we hadn't been in existence that long, a whole 75% of our research was classified as world-leading or internationally outstanding. I stepped down as director in 2010. I'd been the director for 9 years by then, and I've always said I'm not a proper academic. And I thought it was time to have a proper academic take over the Institute, and you'll meet Richard Wortley in a minute. When I stepped down, UCL were preparing a new home for the JDI in Tavistock Square, and Jill has a real presence there. Her pictures greet all our visitors, and we still hand out lots of forget-me-not badges, and you've got some on your seats today. When I gave my inaugural lecture in 2001, I ended by saying that I hope that all those who grieved for Jill would feel that her death had not been for nothing. And I hope they'll agree now that we started on the right road. One last thing. Some years ago, I found a Victorian text that my grandmother had framed. It was very pretty, and it was quite extraordinary. It said, "Sometimes at night a star falls, and in the morning there is the gift of forget-me-nots." And I think that a lot when I think of Jill Dando. Thank you.
Bravo. If you come up with an idea, it's very hard to let go of it, even if other people are so much better than you are. After Gloria, it was hard to find someone who could conceivably be as good as Gloria. She said, we did. He knows more about this field than anyone on earth. He's also the best teacher I've ever come across, and he's someone who irritatingly writes better about this subject than I do, or indeed anybody else I know of, Professor Richard Wortley. Richard.
For a moment there, I thought you were going to introduce someone else, I've got to say. That was me. Look, it was my great privilege to take over the directorship of the JDI from Gloria in 2010. I came to the UK from Australia specifically to take up the role. And I can tell you it's the only job in the world that could have tempted me to travel 16,000 kilometres to the other side of the globe. I can confirm precisely what Nick said. The JDI brand is known in our field internationally, certainly in Australia, in the US and Canada. I didn't know Jill, but I'm enormously proud to lead the Institute in her name. I've got to say I also feel the pressure or burden in doing that, and more so tonight as I've learned more about her. But I do like to think that she too would be proud of what we have achieved. So I want to spend the few minutes I have to tell you about the JDI today and what's been created from the initial £1 million fund. I hope you'll excuse me if I sound boastful at times, but to be frank, I think we've got a lot to be boastful about. We've already heard a little bit about what crime science is, but I want to just spend a few of those minutes reinforcing what I think makes us different, the raison d'etre for our existence. Why should we exist in the first place? And we adopted the term crime science to signal a radical new way to deal with crime, one that we didn't think was being done at the time. It's exactly what it says it is. Crime science is the application of science to the problem of crime. Within that, though, we can get a little bit more elaborate. We think of it as an evidence-based, a problem-solving approach, one that draws on many disciplines across the social, the physical and the life sciences, and that engages with practitioners and policymakers to make real-world impact. As Nick talked about a little, we look at how crime occurs, and as distinct from the usual approach of focusing only on why people might become bad people. And in doing this, we identify ways to block, to deflect, to disrupt or otherwise thwart offenders in their criminal ambitions. So many of the solutions to crime today involve changing the immediate circumstances that allow it to occur, rather than attempt the notoriously difficult task of trying to change offenders. I started my career as a prison psychologist. I spent 10 years trying to change offenders, and I don't think I was very good at it. We do this, for example, by making cars more difficult to steal, by improving security, making crime hotspots safer through targeted police patrols, making child exploitation material harder and riskier to download, making pubs safer places to down a pint, and so forth. So what have we done with the £1 million? Well, purely in terms of size, we've grown dramatically. I visited Gloria in her miserable little office just after the Jill Dando Institute opened. And there she was in a tiny little office with a half-time secretary in another floor. She had to shout down the stairwell to give instructions. Today, the JDI has 30 full-time academics, another 10 or so researchers at any one time, a dozen professional staff, as well as a host of prestigious honorary professors and colleagues, Nick being one, and colleagues from across UCL with whom we collaborate. People have mentioned the multidisciplinarity of crime science. We exemplify that. Within our department, we have academics from 14 or 15 or so different disciplines: psychology, geography, criminology, economics, but importantly, computer science, maths, data science, electronic engineering, forensic sciences. We occupy our own building in Tavistock Square now, which, can I say, we are rapidly outgrowing. And we are now one of the largest crime-focused departments in the world. But size is not everything, it's what you do with it, so I'm told. Our goal is to have real-world impact to reduce crime. And I think we deliver impact in 3 ways. First, through our various teaching programs, we aim to educate tomorrow's leaders in the field, equipping professionals in the crime and security area with the knowledge and skills they need to meet the challenges of the 21st century. Crime is changing dramatically, and the professionals in the field need to adapt to that. We currently have around 300 students at any one time across our 5 master's degrees, our undergraduate degree, and our PhD program. Over the years, we've produced more than 700 graduates, including more than 80 at PhD level. So that's the first thing. Second, we carry out impactful research. In the most recent Research Excellence Framework, one after the one Gloria was talking about, the JDI was one of only a tiny handful of departments across the nation that received 100% assessment for its research output in terms of impact. Over the years, the JDI has won more than £30 million in grants. Some of the highlights, £3.5 million for the What Works in Crime Prevention project that produced an online toolkit in crime prevention that is accessible by professionals in the field. £3.7 million to set up the Doors Centre for Future Crime, which funds a suite of studies aimed at anticipating and forestalling emerging crime problems associated with changing technologies and social changes. And more than £10 million for a series of studies on prevention of radicalisation and terrorist events. The third way we deliver impact is through engagement with practitioners and policymakers. The JDI staff routinely sit on governmental, parliamentary, policing and other practitioner and policymaking bodies and working groups. And we run professional development courses for practitioners across the UK and internationally, including India, New Zealand, Denmark and across Latin America. So I hope you'll agree there's a lot to be proud of and that the JDI is a fitting legacy for Jill. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. As Richard said, JDI works a lot with police. One of the things that struck me when I was doing Crime Watch, I'd ring up criminology departments, and some of them actually saw the police as the enemy, as it were. It's quite interesting. For us, like for many other criminologists, it must be said, the police are really our clients and close collaborators. Cresta Dick and others have been, well, in fact, the Metropolitan Police has a very close relationship with us indeed. The SIO, the Senior Investigating Officer on Jill's murder, Hamish Campbell, wanted to be with us tonight. He is now policing the police, and he's in Jamaica, which is quite some task. And he emailed this morning to say he couldn't be here, but sends his best wishes. But if there's one copper in Britain that really gets what crime prevention is about, it's our next speaker. A chief constable who knows that police have to think smarter, they have to be more evidence-based, and above all, they have to be problem solvers. That means there's no good just chasing around after the event and arresting people. It's best if you can shut the stable door before the horse has bolted. And guess what? I thought his approach would not do him much good professionally, but it turns out he's the poster boy for the National Police Inspectorate. He's a real friend to the JDI, and I think I can say, even if other chief constables would hear this through gritted teeth, that he's the most admired chief officer in Britain. He is the chief constable of Durham. Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Barton.
I'm a bit of a fraud, actually. Our house was burgled 3 weeks ago. I'm a fan of restorative justice, and I think it's stretching the definition of restorative justice, describe pulling out people's toenails one by one. I was a detective inspector in Lancashire in April 1999, immersed in the cut and thrust of crime fighting in Blackpool. Our ambition was to get a case on Crime Watch. Police officers often spend their leisure time avoiding cop shows on the TV like the plague. Crime Watch, however, was different. It spanned the gamut from mainstream entertainment to being a crucial component of investigations across the country. At the time, I was changing my views from a paradigm of crime investigation to one of crime reduction. Part of my frustration was, as a DI, having to arrest the sons of the villains I'd arrested as a DC. But I was also reading books about problem orientation, not rocket science, repeat victimisation and crime prevention, all contained within the pink and the green crime reduction series of books and pamphlets written by Gloria, Nick Tilley and others, when the Home Office briefly followed evidence-based policy, not policy-based evidence. The advent of crime science as a discipline accelerated my learning curve. Albeit austerity has made some things more difficult, it has encouraged policing to value what works. The College of Policing's role in creating a profession is welcome. All professions need a body of knowledge. The research and wisdom coming from UCL and the JDI is helping today's policing students understand the interplay of, amongst other things, science and psychology. Much has changed since 1999. We now have the World Wide Web, restorative justice, social media, PCSOs, cybercrime, and Ofsted style gradings for police forces. Some things remain. We are an essentially unarmed police service, based locally in neighbourhoods, policing by consent. The relative success we have enjoyed in Durham has come from holding dear to Peelian principles, but at the same time seizing the digital age with both hands, with good kit, bespoke software and recruiting millennials. Adding to the nudge theory by researching how victims and offenders' future behaviour can be subliminally influenced. Conducting randomised control trials whenever we can. Publishing our work and encouraging challenge. We also read and then act upon the books you write. Lord Reith created the BBC to inform, educate and entertain. Jill Dando epitomised the responsibility of broadcasters to enlighten, educate and challenge people like me. She is missed.
Super. That is almost it. I mean, there are a lot of other people here we could have invited to speak, and we thought, but hey, we've got to have some time getting together over drinks and canapé so we can actually just talk to each other. Could I just mention again before we do break, the British Heart Foundation, that was Jill's favourite charity. As I say, go and pick up a book about crime science out there. You don't have to pay for it, but if you give a tenner, it all goes to the BHF, and they're out there. Please do give generously. I want to thank in particular the UCL and JDI comms team, Kirsty and Kate in particular. Kirsty, Kate, where are you? Will you just stand up? Because you've put a huge amount of effort. Wherever you are, thank you so much. I come back to where I started about the press and what's going to be in the media in the next few days. We know that Jill's death has caused an enormous number of conspiracy theories, and everybody seems to have a view on who did it or why. And interestingly, the less they know about the particular evidence, the more certain they seem of their beliefs. But then that's true of human beings generally, I suppose. What we all know is that Jill is still, after 20 years, hugely admired and greatly missed. And she leaves behind a legacy of which all of us can be intensely proud.
See some New York attitude up close, you'd catch a ball game. Sorry, has something in my eye. Right.
Sorry. More of that in a moment, but here's Jill with something else.
Struggling away, hello. Service is impeccable.